There's another question here. I thought this was a pretty interesting question. Uh, he says, how could apprenticeships and worker co-ops help end the school to prison pipeline if they would?
Yeah, so
Well,
that's a tough question. I don't think that worker co-ops are per se like them inherently are the solution to every single problem. But one way that I think that this would play out is that right now the US system, right, how we fund our education system in the United States is very unique. In fact, I don't believe that there is one other place in the world that funds their education system in the same way that the United States does. The way that we fund our education system here is based on local property taxes. So that means that the more expensive the homes in the area, the more funding that education system will have, right? And so you're already setting up a system where the wealthiest people are going to get the best education systems because they're going to have the higher priced homes, right? And we already know through a system of redlining that they went in and artificially devalued properties in Black and brown and Jewish owned areas, right? And so
mhm.
and Irish as well. So they were able to devalue those properties just based on the fact that, well, you can literally read the redlining documents. It will say what the percentage of the Negro population was or the Irish population is in this area, and based on that, they will devalue that, right? And it's a very interesting thing. I'll try to remember the name of the website where you can just read the actual documents that they've scanned in from different libraries that they pulled these out of and researched this. And so through artificial devaluing of Black and brown homes and communities, that means that schools within those communities are funded at lower rates. In most other countries around the world, the way that they actually fund their education system is that they look at where the underfunded regions of the nation are, and they supplement those places with more funding. So if you have lower income, if you have lower property values in a certain area, that means that you're going to have lower incomes typically. So those are people that are more marginalized, struggling more. And what they do is they actually increase funding in those areas. Those schools are funded higher than the schools in places with higher property values. Why? Because places where people are wealthy, they already have the means of things like being able to pay for tutors for their kids, extracurricular activities, after school programs. They can fund all of those with their own private money. It's the places where the people are struggling that they need more funding. We need to increase
Yeah.
funding to those places. So one way that we would do that is by taking control back over our economic system and gaining economic power. We can then influence our political system. Look to places like Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, that have started with Black worker cooperatives and now are using their economic influence to influence politics as well within their communities and to change policy. So I think the way that we do it is by gaining economic power. We can then gain political power, and we can finally have a say over things like how we fund our education system. And unfortunately, I don't think that until we control the means of production and until we control the surplus of our labor, we don't possess enough economic power in order to actually affect policy in this country. So
Mhm.
the way we do that is by changing the way that we fund our education systems. But the way we change the way we fund our education systems is only by gaining true democratic economic power. I'll just use Massachusetts as an example because we have some of the best schools here in Massachusetts, but we also fund charter schools, and we also have vast wealth and income inequality in Boston and in Massachusetts more broadly. But in Boston alone, there was a study done in 2017. The median white family, the wealth of the median white family is $247,000. The
Mhm.
median wealth of a Black family in Boston at the same time was $8. Okay, so $8 to $247,000. All right. And so that means that where Black people are tending to live in poorer, communities, they're going to have worse education systems. And so even in a so-called liberal state like Massachusetts, right, we're considered liberal. 80% of our legislature is controlled by Democrats. So there is total Democratic control over our government here. We do have a Republican governor, which is sad, and some weird phenomenon that happens in the Northeast here, where we tend to have Republican governors in Democratic states, just oddly, but it's because even the Democrats here are by and large pretty conservative. And so this idea that we can somehow, change policy by just electing enough Democrats, it just doesn't bear out. If you look at a place like Massachusetts, it doesn't bear out. If that were true, we would have changed the funding system for education here in Massachusetts, but we don't. We still are beholden to the same funding of our education system. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but the reality is, it's not going to come directly, I don't think, but it will happen over time, slowly, if we are able to gain, enough economic power that we can start to influence policy at a state and then national level.
Yeah, thank you for that. Um, it, pertaining to, trying to halt the school to prison pipeline, especially through, uh, it would probably be better served through a workplace democracy. Because if people are able to make a living wage, then they also will be able to have more property taxes to provide for that school in that area. Um, but I also agree that any place that has uh, a lower income area should be basically subsidized. The finances should be offset and given uh, more generously to that area in order to have equal education for all.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And
Um,
one other thing that I just thought of too with that is that, of your point is that one of the places that we would have workplace democracy is within our school systems, right? Schools are a workplace, right, for the teachers.
mhm.
And
Yep.
so if we had workplace democracy, if those teachers were able to democratically, vote on these things, we could have, and again, workplace democracy, it also extends. There are models of workplace democracy where
Yeah.
it's not just the workers that are included in that, but also the consumers as well. So that would be the parents as well having a say, and get together a bunch of parents and the teachers and allow them to vote on things like, should we be, let's look at the data of how we punish Black students versus how we punish white students, and we will see the disproportionate way that Black students are suspended and expelled from schools. I was expelled from a school. I was suspended from one school, a private school, 14 times before I was ultimately expelled from that school and wound up in a charter school at Boston Latin School. And and so we can see how Black kids, and I was suspended 14 times for fighting because of the racism. I had 5 foot long dreads when I was growing up. I was raised Rastafarian, and so I had 5 foot long dreads growing up. And I had white kids at my school calling them shitlocks. And when they would tease me for my hair, and I was one of the 3 Black kids at the school. I mean, there were only 45 kids in the school total. It was a very small private school on an island,
Mhm.
in Boston Harbor. But 3 Black kids in the school, and I was constantly picked on. And when I responded to that by getting into fights, I was suspended repeatedly because it was, even though they were provoking it with their racism, my response to it being to defend myself from having my hair pulled and things like that was to fight back. And when I fought back, I did so successfully. And what ultimately happened was I was punished disproportionately, and I ended up getting suspended and expelled from that school. So this is just anecdotal, but we know that this happens at a mass level, across the country. And so the reality is, if we gave the parents and the teachers a democratic vote on what was happening within those school systems, I guarantee you that Black parents and Black communities, and especially if we require teachers to come from the communities that they serve, then even more so, I think that we would see a response that would say, no, we will not do things like, I think that you would see there's massive support for removing cops from schools. That's one of the major problems. That's one of the major
Mm.
catalyst for the school to prison pipeline is the fact that we started putting cops in schools. And what that does is to start to criminalize behavior that would typically be seen as just kids acting up, right? And that then gets seen as, that gets criminalized, and then people are sent to jail, right? So that's a part of it, by allowing these teachers and the parents as well, I think, to have a say democratically in those systems. Then we would see things like cops being removed from schools, and suspensions and expulsions of Black and brown kids being, lowered, because it would have to be, that we would review the data and we would see scientifically that there is something inadequate, unfair and unequal when two kids are being punished differently for the same exact behavior. So
Yeah.
that's just one other thought I have on why workplace democracy would actually be help to eradicate the problem of the school to prison pipeline.
That was very beautifully put. That anecdotal evidence helps to really flesh out why workplace democracy, including in our spaces of education, are deeply important.